Hey, welcome to another episode of Pirkei Avos, live with Rabbi Chaim Coffman, who's always making me laugh. More than that, he's sharing genuine Torah, and we're still continuing in the ethics of the fathers. It's always beautiful to learn ethics, and nothing can be more quickly applied to everyday living than ethics. And what better class than ethics of the fathers with Rabbi Chaim Coffman? So let's just jump right in and see how the rabbi's doing. Rabbi Coffman, you know what? I didn't show the intro screen. I just jumped right in so everybody can see you laughing and they're watching.
Come on. I closed my eyes. I turned the other way. Come on.
Rabbi, you got the stage, sir. It's always a joy to hear you share Torah.
I'll say to you, I'll say to William Hall, no one makes you laugh more than I do. It's either I make you laugh or I make you cry. That's the way it is. So we are still holding by chapter 1, Mishnah 17. Hopefully we'll make a little bit of progress. We'll see if we actually finish it today. So again, just as a little bit of review, Shimon, his son, says, all the days have been raised among the sages, found nothing better for oneself than silence, right? Not study, but practice. Oh, we're going to hit that. And that practice is the main thing. One who talks excessively brings on sin. So we've hit, a number of different aspects, about silence. And now we're going to hit a few other things. As, I mentioned a little bit earlier, we're going to start off a little bit with a bang here. And that is that we know silence is good. You don't cause anybody pain, right? It's certainly good for the body. And, a person has to be careful what they say, how they say, certainly the effect that it has on others, right? Could have an effect on us, could have an effect, on others and third parties, fourth parties, all over social media. Now, when it comes to spiritual things, many times, silence isn't good enough. There are times you may have to call out people, right? Because they are heretics. Now, people are going to say, hey, are you allowed to do that? Isn't that Lashon Hara? Isn't that speaking badly against someone else? That only applies when he's doing what we call Maisa Amcha. What does Maisa Amcha mean? The acts of our people. If he's a heretic and he's not acting like he should, then 100% not only can you call them out, we mentioned this a number of times, and we'll get more specific in a second, right? We mentioned that you can call him out, you can embarrass him, right? Even though embarrassing another Jew in public is akin to murder, right? Why is it akin to murder? Because it turns the person's face white, then it turns red, red being blood referring to murder, but it's not really murder, right? But it could come under the category because you destroy somebody who's a heretic. I could take away their livelihood. There are a lot of different things a person can do because they're not doing what God wants, right? So just to bring up an example, something just happened recently. We're going to quote my Rabbi here in a blasting letter against the chief Rabbi of England. He's had a few issues, or a number of issues, with what this clown has been saying about Judaism and different things. And I'm just going to quote a little bit, and I'll just explain what he means. So he says, to my brothers, the residents of England, I'm deeply shocked to hear the blasphemous statements made by the chief rabbi, Ephraim Mervis, quote him in person here. He spoke arrogantly, contemptuously about our holy forefathers, the holy prophets, Yaakov Avinu, David HaMelech, King David, Shaul HaMelech, King Saul, Eov, Yonah, and other leaders and prophets of the nation. It's beyond imagination anyone could utter such statements, but due to our many sins, no voice of protest has been heard. So he says the statements are direct continuation of the views espoused by the Maskilim, right? The ones who went off and became heretics, went into secular philosophy and different things, interpreting biblical events based on the thoughts of simple people. And this we're going to explain in a second. Such attitudes result in the publication, such terrible statements about our holy forefathers, prophets, woe to the generation which has to witness this. Obviously, he says that in order to learn the stories recorded in the Torah, You have to first realize, can't fathom their greatness and holiness. And I'll tell you what he said in a second. Their entire behavior is exclusively devoted for the purpose of serving God without any extraneous consideration. Any decision or conduct on their part stemmed only from the motive of giving pleasure to Hashem. We have no notion of the greatness and depth of thought. Now, what did he say? What did this bozo say about King David? What did he say about Yaakov? What did he say about King Saul, Job, Jonah? What did he say? He said that, many trials and tribulations they went through and they had difficulty. He said it definitely seems that, they had mental health issues. Now, in layman's terms, if you go through the entire book of Psalms, King David running for his life, always telling God, I know you're going to save me even though I don't deserve it. I serve you with all my soul. I do whatever I can, to please you and sing your praises or whatever. But in humanistic terms, what could a person say? A person can say, listen, he's being chased his entire life. He's fearing his entire life. Don't you think maybe he's playing the harp, and singing God's praises or whatever because he needs a little extra oomph in his step? God forbid. In other words, music can bring a person out of depression. Now that, we're over the 3 weeks, we're over the 9 days. We just came through the destruction of the temple, etc. Fast on Thursday. So don't people love to listen to music? Okay, we'll have to find what music is, even what Jewish music is. But don't people enjoy listening to music? 100%. Gives you an extra oomph in your step. But is that what we want to say? Is that what we want to say about King David? About Yaakov? About King Saul? Right? What does my Rebbe here say? He said their entire behavior devoted to the purpose of serving God. No other consideration. We have no idea who these people are, right? And who they were. Now, does it mean that all of them were 100% perfect? We're not saying they're perfect, right? There are many cases in the Talmud where it says if you think this, King David sinned, you're wrong, right? You have to go through the story with Bathsheba and exactly what happened, right? But technically speaking, he didn't do anything wrong. There's something very small within, whatever, right? But the Talmud says anyone who says he sinned is making a mistake. Anyone who said Judah sinned, whatever, making a mistake. This one sinned, it's a mistake, right? We have to, you're talking about people we don't have any idea. We don't have any idea who they are. So some people say worse things. They'll say, when it comes to when it came to the Akedah, to the binding of Isaac, not only did God fail the test, Abraham also failed. That's heresy, right? Yes. That is absolute heresy. So with this bozo in England, now the problem is that none of the other rabbis really, it's a political appointment, right? So none of the other rabbis really, think he's any great sheikhs anyway. Probably most of them never heard of him, which really doesn't matter, right? But the problem is, what does he represent? He represents Orthodox Jewry as the chief rabbi of England. Now, even if we don't hold by him, if he's a reform rabbi, I don't care. If he's a conservative rabbi, I don't care. They don't hold the Torah's true, right? They don't hold that the Torah is divine. If they don't hold that the Torah is divine, then they can take it apart. They can chop it up. It doesn't matter. We know where they stand. If you're an Orthodox Jew and you're going to tell me that some of the greatest people in the history of the creation of the world, you're going to put a 21st century spin and say, yeah, he could have been suffering from depression. Now, to say such a thing is blasphemous. Totally blasphemous. Because you're putting your ideas, right? You're putting your 21st century idea on somebody you don't have any clue about. Now, it could be, it could be that, they went through trials and tribulations, right. And the way we see it, we can say, yeah, he was depressed. Right? It seems like a form of depression, right? But the problem is they're going to say, okay, so we make him human. So if we make him human and not like supernatural almost, not like we're worshiping the ground that they walk on and they're absolutely perfect. Nobody's perfect, right? Doesn't King Solomon say no one's been in this world, right? That's never sinned, right? So, but these are the greatest people created in the history of man. So we don't come up to an ankle. My Rebbe doesn't come up to an ankle to them. His Rebbe doesn't come out to an ankle to them. My Rebbe's Rebbe doesn't come up to an ankle, right? You have no idea who you're talking about. So if you have, the problem is that this person made a statement, an arrogant statement, no question about it, as if to say, I know where they're holding. I know exactly who they are. I understand what's underneath what they're doing, what they're saying. Really? These people are prophets. These people, you don't have any idea. We speak about them and we speak about their character traits, but can we really understand, what they went through? You imagine, just give one example. I don't want to harp on this too much, right? But I'll give one example, and that is, you take Abraham's father. Abraham's father, Terah, was a big-time idol worshiper. You have to understand, in the time of Abraham, everybody was idol worshiping. So Abraham's father goes away. He's out for the day. What does Abraham do? Takes a stick, destroys all the idols, and the Medrash says, he puts the stick in the hand of one idol. So his father comes back and goes, hey, what happened? He says, no, Dad, you have to understand, there's a big war, and all these idols were fighting, and this idol won the war. So his father, Terah, says, Abe, what are you talking about? These things don't have power. They can't do anything on their own. So Abraham says to his father, Dad, that's great. So why do you worship them? I understand why you sell them. It's good for business, right? Why do you worship them? So his father's like, oh, you smart aleck kid. I'm going to take you to Nimrod, right? I'm going to take you to that evil king Nimrod. And Abraham, wiped the floor with him. He says, oh, so you think, so Nimrod's like, oh, so these things have no power. He says, well, you know what I think has real power? He says, I think fire has real power. So Nimrod's like, oh, that's, interesting idea. Fire has power, but, water has more power over fire. It can put out fire. So Nimrod's like, oh yeah, it's a good point. He says, well, what about wind? Right? Wind can take the water. So Nimrod, I think, understands where this is going. He goes, let's go back to fire. He goes, I like fire better. He says, you talk about the power of fire? I'm going to stick you into an oven. Let's see what you do with fire. Right? And the angel Gabriel comes down, cools off the fire, and he walks out. No wounds, no nothing. This is the family he grows up in. Right? This is the world. This is the world he grows up in. When the Torah says he's called Avraham HaIvri, everyone mistranslates it and says Abraham the Jew. Even if you want to tell me, according to the Talmud, he kept the Torah before it was given, whatever that means, he's not Jewish yet. There's no giving the Torah Mount Sinai. There are no Jews, right? Seemingly, they're all Noahites, right? Super Noahites, whatever you want to call them, right? They were basically Noahites. The whole discussion. One second. So what happened? No Jews until Mount Sinai. So what is Abraham HaIvri? What is Avram HaIvri? Ivri means, the language is Aver, right? Like Avar Yarden, the plains of Jordan. What does Aver mean? It means on the other side. It means that Abraham, commentaries tell us, was on one side of the world, everybody else on the other. And he brought absolute monotheism to the world. You think that's easy? Everyone making fun of him, everyone picking on him. Everyone saying, come on, where's your God? Has he ever spoken to you? At this point, he hadn't. He said no, but everyone was walking around with their pocket God. They're like, here's Bob. Don't leave home without him. Everyone has their pocket God. And he came to this idea of absolute monotheism, to this idea of design in the world, whether at the age of 3 or the age of 40, difference of opinion. Now, you take somebody like that, a figure like that, not only that, he has all these different trials and tribulations he goes through. He has to fight a major war to save his last remaining, family member, Lot. 4 kings against the 5. He's like, yeah, no problem. Let's go to war. Different things. We don't have any idea who we're talking about over here. So you want to say, look at all the mental anguish he went through. Look at his family. Look what happened with his kids. What happened with Ishmael. He has to send him away. He doesn't want to send him away. But God says, listen to Sarah. She knows more than you. She's a greater prophet than you. etc. Okay, so you could say, wow, we had a hard time. I can put my 21st century on it, my spin on it, and I can say, look what he went through. Look at all the difficulty. Don't you think maybe he had good days or bad days? Right? I could say that, but do I understand who I'm talking about? I mean, I could be arrogant as this idiot, and say, I know better. I certainly know. He was probably clinically depressed. You don't say that about the Avos. You don't say that about Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. I understand why it's being said. But when you're talking about people that, that went through whatever they went through and who they are, we don't have a clue. We absolutely don't have a clue who these people are. If we don't have a clue how great these people are, how in the world can you put a 21st century spin on what they went through and what their mental capacity is? Because even if you're going to say it, I mean, it certainly makes them look bad, don't you think? I mean, he's making them look human, right? He'll say, listen, these songs and different things King David said, whatever, couldn't that have been from, because of all the chasing around him and the fact he was afraid of dying and put all his faith in God? Don't you think he could have been a little bit depressed? Well, how far do you take that? You're not talking about someone today or someone of a previous generation. You're talking about someone who could have been the fourth of the Avos. He could have been the fourth of the patriarchs over here. Right? You don't have any idea who you're talking about. If you have no idea who you're talking about, how can you put this claim, God forbid, on him? Right? Exactly what my Rabbi here says. We can't fathom their greatness and holiness. It's beyond us. It's beyond us. So how could somebody like that put a spin, so to speak, 21st century spin? It doesn't exist. That's heresy. Right? That's basically heresy. Yeah, question.
Well, yeah, I mean, you made me even think about the great prophet Elijah, who was on the run in a cave, and and he, you could say he was having a pressing moment, but diamonds are made by a lot of pressing. But Rabbi, I mean, we're losing a bit of the audience. A lot of the audience is tuned in, but Sandra's asking, what were the backgrounds of the statements? She's trying to understand, was there something behind her? Was this just something that somebody just, or this
he didn't just flick it out? He's being interviewed. I mean, the video is out there. You can see it, right? But it's not taken out of context. It's not like someone just took a little clip. This is not the first time he said anything negative, certainly like that, right? Certainly, he's made comments a few years ago. There was a whole controversy in England that in England in all educational places they wanted to teach about homosexuality. Now, obviously, they didn't ask the Muslims this because they were afraid they would destroy the country. So the whole question, what to do in the yeshivas, right? What to do in Jewish schools. Right, I think they're private. I don't know why the government necessarily should have a say, but it's not really the point. The idea being, he didn't see it was a problem. He didn't see it was a problem. Now you could tell me to answer for him. You could say, listen, it's a political position. He has to be politically correct. He has to answer to politicians. Blah blah blah. Right, but the problem is, as the Mishnah here says, or as we explain, when it comes to spiritual things, there are many times a person may have to speak out. Now, the problem is, if you were to ask him, okay, Leviticus chapter 18, right? Verse 22, 21, 22, where it says over there explicitly it's forbidden. Don't give me Webster's fifth definition. It's forbidden. Right? Homosexuality is forbidden. How are you going to spin it? It's okay. And not only that, why would you teach kids that to say it's a normative lifestyle? We don't believe it's a normative lifestyle. It's not a normative lifestyle. Because the Torah tells me when a person gets married, you cling to your wife. It doesn't say you cling to the same sex. It doesn't say that. Right? You have to watch the first video we did on controversial issues, about homosexuality. But, that is definitely the case. Right? So that's not the first time, he said something. Again, the context could have been over there he's trying to save face and he wants to placate the politicians. But push come to shove, We don't care about politicians. Lose your job. Go somewhere else. Find something else to do. Whatever it is. Bottom line is
Don't paint with a dark brush.
Leviticus chapter 18 says it's forbidden. You can't make a spin on that. Right? There are other people who've tried to make a spin on it and say, what, you really think God's going to kill such a person? And they grew up this way, they came out and it was pretty obvious when they were younger. It doesn't matter. I could have a bad chromosome, inside that could cause this. So what? Doesn't mean God wants you to act on it. It's like any bad character trait, whether it's being a miser, whether it's getting angry, whether all these other things. I could say to God, what do you want from me? You programmed me this way. You wired me this way. How could you expect I'm not going to act on it? God says, of course I wired you this way. And people wire different ways. Some things get them more upset, less upset, this, that. Everyone's got their trials they have to work on. But you yourself have this. You have to work on this. So if you have to work on this, don't pass the buck. Don't say, oh, you wired me this way. What can I do? I'm stuck this way. It's not true. Because I have an ability to overcome. Now, God's not going to say, well, you think it's so easy? You think it's going to be so easy to overcome? Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how we're programmed, right? We can always say, because, there are some doctors that'll say they've isolated a certain gene that makes someone homosexual. Okay. Maybe they've isolated the anger gene, the miser gene, the Lashon Hara gene. What do I care if it's isolated? That just means you're more susceptible to it, right? If you're more susceptible, it means it's going to be harder to overcome. Doesn't mean you're not going to be able to. Yeah.
Yeah. Can I just ask about a handicapped person? Let's just say, we know if somebody doesn't have legs, we don't expect them to walk, right? We're not going to ask them to run a marathon and expect them that they have to run a marathon even when they have no legs or control of their legs. What about somebody, say, with a traumatic brain injury, somebody who's damaged, and psychology or scans are starting to show that certain regions of the brain affect certain areas? What if somebody has some involuntary control in that behavior? Is there if it's beyond your control, you're exempt. What about someone's Down syndrome? Right? Someone asked me this today. One of my son-in-laws asked me this today by the Shabbos day. What about someone who's Down syndrome? Right? What are they obligated to do? I mean, you try and educate them in Torah mitzvahs, but they're limited. Right? They're limited in knowledge. Some more, some less, right? But they're limited. We don't just say, oh, they're totally exempt, right? You try and educate them as best as you can, right? Depending on whatever, whatever. It doesn't change Torah, right?
The Torah doesn't change, but they themselves may be exempt in many things because they're not holding them, right? In other words, they get angry, they do things. God's not going to hold them liable because they're not holding anywhere in the world. Now, if they could come to synagogue, do some mitzvahs, pray a little bit, whatever, okay, you still have to educate them at their level, right? It's what King Solomon says, right? Hanoch lefi darko. You educate them according to his way. His way, not my way, right? Not what I think is best for him, what is best for the kid. Now, this goes, across the board, even to kids that are normal, right? Some see things, some things. Sometimes people see things visually, other kids otherwise, whatever. Each person is not a cookie cutter. They're not all the same, right? But someone who's definitely limited, their obligation is going to be limited, right? The Torah doesn't change, that's for sure, right? But you're not going to obligate the person if he's not holding anywhere in the world, right? And again, it's going to depend on the level of the handicap. If they could do more, okay, right? But, if someone's got all these limitations, God's going to expect zero from them. And he's actually punishing that soul by putting it in that body, right? It's a punishment for the soul, not for the person, not for the person now. It's for the soul. Because if a child is born in such a way, right? They're born, autistic. They're born, cerebral palsy, whatever. You fill in whatever it is. If they're born a certain way, it can't be they're born to suffer. Why do I say that? I say that because that's to do with the soul. Because that person hasn't done anything wrong. When does a person get judged in this world? After bar mitzvah, usually by the age of 20, right? After 13 or 12 to the age of 20, right? So it can't be punishment for what they have done here. It's got to be punishment for what was done before, because God doesn't make mistakes, right? There are repercussions for our actions. We mentioned, if a woman, God forbid, smoked crack, let's say when she was pregnant, and the kid comes out deformed, it's not the kid's fault, but there's a reality, right? God just didn't do anything to stop it, but there's a reality. So if a person's born, all things being equal, there are no issues, and a child comes out with all kinds of deformities and other things, and mentally challenged and all that, it's not their fault. The soul's getting punished. 100% the soul's getting punished. That there's nothing to talk about. How do I know the soul's getting punished? The reason is because usually there's reward and punishment for my action, for what I've done. We're going to speak about action if I get there, right? For what I've done. The problem is I haven't done anything wrong. This person hasn't done anything wrong. They come into the world clean slate. If they come into the world clean slate, what's the issue? Why in the world should they be punished? Right? They shouldn't be punished. Right? So over here, the point is, is that people cannot just say whatever they want.
Right.
They cannot put a 21st century spin on people that we don't understand the greatness of who they are. Right? That was the point. So there are times you have an obligation to speak up. Regardless, people are going to listen, not going to listen. But Rabbi says, I felt there's an obligation to say something because no one's saying anything. Right? That's how this come up. So certainly when it comes to learning, that'll be the case. In other words, you have to get to the essence. You have to get to the essence of the matter. But each person has their own speech. Now there are laws. Obviously, we mentioned there are laws guarding speech. Right? If there are laws guarding speech, what do we say over here? It's better never to speak. I mean, silence is better. Right? When the Chaim wrote his work on Shmir Salashim, of guarding against speaking badly against others, people said, Rabbi, you're not allowing us to speak. The Chaim said, I didn't say you're forbidden to speak. I said the whole purpose of what I wrote was to teach you how to speak. Right? That's something totally different. Right? 100% is totally different. So a person has to be careful, how they speak, and it's definitely better to be silent. But then again, if a person is silent, what could that mean? Right? We say shtika kehodah. Someone who's silent, it could be like he's agreeing. He doesn't answer because they don't want to get anyone in trouble. And someone says, well, this person do X, you don't say anything. Right? Say, tell me if X did this or you're going to lose your job. Right? Says the Chaim, you have to lose your job. You're not allowed to speak Lashon Hara against this person. Right? Even if it's true. So that being said, what if he's silent? He said, this person do it, you don't say anything. They're going to say, well, what did we say before? What did the Mishnah say? The Mishnah said best thing is silence. But if I keep silent over here, what's the problem? If I keep silent, then it's like I'm agreeing. If I'm agreeing, right, obviously that's bad. So there are times, right? There are times where a person's going to have to speak, right? He may have to say something, but you have to know how to speak. Comes along the great Mashgiach, Rabbi Lopian of blessed memory. He explains silence is even better than fasting, right? Some people think, and I've gotten this a number of times, that people will say, I want to fast. Right? I want to fast 1 day a week, twice, whatever. I want to fast as an atonement for my sins.
We saw a lot of that with Noahides this week, Rabbi.
People will say, I want to run around in the snow when it's 20 below, right? To show penance or whatever. If you read the beginning of Path of the Just by the Ramchal, by Moshe Chaim Lutzato, of blessed memory, what does the Ramchal say? People think aesthetics, this is a beautiful thing, right? You inflict the body, right? You say, I'm going to afflict the body. It's a form of penance. Comes along the Ramchal, not my language. He goes, this person's not holy at all. Because there's an obligation we see in this week's parsha we just read. There's an obligation to guard the body. So if you have an obligation to guard the body, if you afflict it when it shouldn't be afflicted, that's a transgression. But he doesn't just say that. He said you're a fool. The Ramchal says, person who thinks you're going to run around the snow in a tank top and shorts, you're a fool, right? You're an absolute fool. Comes along with Victor Miller. Someone asked him this, many years ago, about fasting or whatever. And Victor Miller, one of the Torah giants of the last generation of blessed memory, Victor Miller said, it's not for us, right? It's not for this generation. Right, previous generations maybe, not so we were much weaker. Other things, not for this generation. So he said, you know what's better than fasting? So Victor Miller, blessed memory, said, it's better to read Path of the Just 100 times. Go and read it. Feel like a piece of dirt. Understand what you have to do in this world. It's 10 times better than fasting. We're not into fasting, right? Certainly not for this generation. Now, someone will come along, or others, many will say, but I still want to fast. I still want to fast. Okay, this is somebody, right? We're talking about Rav Eli Lopian, right? We're talking about Rav Victor Miller. We're talking about Torah giants of the last generation. Nothing to talk about according to everybody. I think they know better than us, right? I'm going to venture to say they know better than us. Now, if someone still says, I don't care, I'm going to do it, okay? Right? You're not gonna argue with that. There's no arguing, right? You think you know better than everybody else, okay? Right? So comes along Rav Eli Lopian, and there are plenty of people out there. I'm not singling out anybody. There are plenty of people out there that I've heard this over and over and over again. Okay, they think they know better. You think you know better than the great rabbis of the generation, and they're the ones giving us direction. You think you know better. You know better, right? There's no point to argue, right? Comes along Rav Eli Lopian. And he said, silence is better than fasting. Why? Because the more a person speaks, the easier it is to sin. Why? Because we have what we call, or I would call, I didn't coin the phrase, right? But you can say people have what we call diarrhea of the mouth. They just talk, and they
Verbal
talk,
diarrhea,
and they talk. That's what they do, right? So it's easier to sin. Definitely by speaking, Lashon Hara, Rechilus. Rechilus means you're a talebearer. He said, hey, Reuben, do you hear what Shimon said, right? You're a talebearer. And then, what are they going to have to do? Then they're going to have to fast to receive atonement, right? So isn't it better? I mean, obviously it's not the case. We repent. But I'm saying, his argument is silence is better than fasting. But if you speak, and you speak against others, Lashon Hara or Rechilus, whatever it is, then what's going to be the end result? We just said silence is better than fasting. So if I speak and I speak badly, what do I have to go back and do to repent? I have to fast. So we see over here, silence stops the person. Certainly hold from speaking things they shouldn't. And they don't even get atonement by fasting, right? Because obviously it's not good for the body, right? Atonement only comes through fasting on Yom Kippur, right? Only comes through fasting. Now, if a person, in previous generations, could a person fast and atone? It depends for what. If it's something that's between man and man, right? Let's make it clear. If it's something between man and man, no amount of fasting, no amount of repentance does anything. You have to assuage them. You have to appease them. You have to say, don't tell them what you did. Obviously, they'll hate you more, right? You say, before Yom Kippur, you say, if I've done anything to offend you, whatever, if I've done anything like that, then, do you forgive me? If it's something between man and man, and you don't have that before Yom Kippur, you go into Yom Kippur with still that sin. If it's between man and God, now it depends what you did. If it's a negative command, you're not liable for the death penalty, whatever the case is. So if I fast on Yom Kippur, I truly repent, I have remorse, I have regrets, I say I'm not going to do it again, and I work very hard towards that goal, then you get repentance. But if it's something like this idiot makes a desecration of God's name, which is the worst sin a person can do, a desecration of God's name, a person has to fast on Yom Kippur, has to go through Yom Kippur, person has to have remorse, have regret, have the proper repentance, has to suffer, has to go through suffering in this world, and the only time they get the atonement is with all these things, and you have to die. if you don't die, you don't get atonement for this, even if you did everything else, 50 years straight. Doesn't help, right? So therefore, we see over here that speaking too much is going to cause problems, right? You're going to say, why, how easy is it to speak Lashon Hara? It's pretty easy, right? It is definitely pretty easy. You say, I'll give an example. Let's say you're in a group of people, and you start praising, ex-rabbi, right? Whoever this rabbi, you start praising him like you can't imagine who he is and all the books he wrote and how great and, and all his righteousness and everything else. And you got somebody there that doesn't like him, right? So the more excessively you praise the person, it's going to cause someone to speak badly against him. So you're going to say, what? I can't say good things about some people? The Chaim says you have to be careful. You have to be careful because if you excessively praise, someone's going to come along and start saying negative things, right? So you're going to ask me the $1 million question. Ooh, a good question. You're going to ask me the $1 million question, and you're going to say, why do I have to worry what other people do? Why do I have to care what other people are going to say or do? Right? Why should it matter? And the answer is it does matter. Because if I'm not careful what I say, right, and I excessively, praise somebody, someone along the way could make some disparaging comments, and you cause them to speak Lashon Hara. Now again, is it my fault the person said it? I directly caused it because I was there, praising this person. So there will be many things a Jew, let's say better, a Jew is never going to be aware of, unless they learn these laws. And, you have to learn these laws because they come up every day, right? What I'm allowed to say, what I'm not allowed to say, etc. So obviously being quieter and not speaking up is definitely better, right? It's definitely better because what comes out of your mouth, you have to be careful. Unless the person's a heretic. If the person's a heretic, I have free license, right? You can't just say anything you want, right? But technically you could say whatever you want, because the person takes away his own status, of being a Jew. He takes himself out of the picture. Now, speaking too much, what other problems are there? Speaking too much can cause pain to the body. Why can it cause pain to the body? Because someone could say something and it could upset you. It can make you sad. Could lead a person, we said before, could lead a person to depression, right? Or, God forbid, something worse. There are many illnesses, caused by this. Someone causes you stress, right? We don't have enough stress today. Someone adds on top of that. Makes you feel bad, puts you down, so to speak, and then you start questioning certain things. There are people who've grown up, messed up houses, where the parents always put them down, right? The parents, said, "Oh, you'll never amount to anything. You'll never be anything." I was told that, in grammar school, my artwork would never, I'll never amount to anything because the way I draw didn't hinder me in other things, right? But okay, art wasn't necessarily my strong point. My girls, I don't know where they got their artistic ability. It definitely wasn't from me, right? But if you get put down enough, in all kinds of different things, you start believing the clippings. And when you believe the clippings and you say you're a problematic child, what does the person think, right? This is Psychology 101. What does the person think? I'm a bad child, right? Why? Because, if everyone says it, I must be that. So I'm going to act that way. Now, a person also at a young age, you got to have some level of self-esteem. Problem is when you get beaten down enough and you start believing it could ruin you. It could ruin you throughout your life, right? I'll give an example of somebody having a hard time with parents. They don't want to keep Shabbos and other things, still living at home, etc. And the person's really upset. Not only they make fun of what he does, which is hard enough. I mean, I had it myself and whatever, I had to get out of my house, but the person said, I really feel bad. etc. I want them to be able to enjoy what I do. I want them to be able to see the goodness of what Torah is, what mitzvahs. They don't want any part of it. They're against it, right? They're self-hating Jews. They're 100% against it. So I gave this person, free advice. And my free advice is you'll never see anything from them. Zero. Now, this is a very painful thing to hear. That they may never get on board. They may never say one good thing what you do about Judaism. You get married, raise a family, you can have beautiful kids, and they'll never attribute it to, the way you brought them up. Right? Now, raising kids today, very, very difficult. No question. I think one of the more difficult generations, no question about it, to raise kids. Even in the most orthodox of orthodox families, can kids go sour? They can go sour. Right? There are a million reasons why. Really not the point for this discussion, right? But again, it's a reflection on the parents. We do have about a 90% or more success rate, so we do see that it works. Kids can fall through the cracks. There can be problems between the parents. There could be self-esteem issues. There could be any number, any number of issues, right? But at the end of the day, if a person comes up from a messed up home, or the parents are totally against, or whatever the case is, first of all, you got to get out of Dodge as quickly as possible. That's for sure. Second of all, what you need to do is realize they may never 100% be on board. And if they're not on board, now you have to understand, this is your entire life. You get up in the morning, everything is guided by what the Torah says. I wash my hands, I say Moda'ani, thank God for giving me my soul. You go to the bathroom, you make a blessing, you say other blessings over the Torah, whatever. You got to get ready to pray. If you're a guy, you got to go to synagogue. Your whole day is dictated by what we have to do, about learning, blessings, what you're allowed to say, not allowed to say. It's not like someone once told me, well, you like to pray all day, I like to play golf. Now, let's break down that stupid statement, right? In other words, in the morning, how long does it take to pray? Without reading the Torah. Say 40 minutes if you pray quick enough. 50 minutes altogether. I'll say an hour. Let's say an hour, right? Afternoon service, 15 minutes. Evening service, 15 minutes. That doesn't sound like all day to me, does it? Right? That's an hour and a half. That's an hour and a half of your day through prayer. Okay, you gotta learn. You got other things to do. What does that have to do with playing golf? I play golf all day. Well, what's the connection? That's a ludicrous statement to make, right? Right? But what was the person saying? What I do is what I do. What you do is what you do. No, I'm dictated by what God says I have to do. You don't happen to believe in that God? Okay, that's your choice. But I'm talking to someone. They're no longer in this world, right? But you're talking about someone, couldn't read Hebrew, doesn't know anything about anything, and makes a stupid statement, right? And they make a statement like that to put you down, right? No, I don't think they were necessarily doing it on purpose for that. If other people do that, that's okay. But in the end, you can say, wow, you must be really strong. Well, I'm 6,000 miles away. It made life a lot easier for different things. But at a certain point, I don't care anymore. You can say sticks and stones, say whatever you want. You're an ignoramus. You want to be an ignoramus? You want to argue with a PhD? Okay. You want to argue with a PhD. So, maybe I said things that were very strong. They took it to heart. And that was it, right? Meaning you have very little connection. But if I would have listened to the clippings of what people said, you got to be kidding. They would have demolished me, right? I've had people that, I've spoken to over the years, great rabbinical authorities, and they said it's 100% miracle you turned out the way you did. It's like,
wow.
Being psychologically intact. And again, it's not, I'm not saying it's a boost for me or anything else. People can go through horrible times.
Oh, yeah.
Horrible times, growing up or whatever, in school, by parents, person can be bullied, person can be, sexually assaulted, other things. All these things are not easy, right? And a person may need very, very serious and heavy therapy, in order to get through it. But when a person gets put down, this is really the point here, is that when a person gets put down, they can be down for the count. right? And they could say, I'll never amount to anything. I'll never be able to do this because, that's what everybody says. Who cares
And
what
that's
everybody
where it's
says?
like murder, isn't it?
So there are people out there paralyzed because of how they grew up. Now this could be 50 years later, could be 60 years later, could be 40 years later. They never got over the hump, right? So to speak. It's a very difficult thing. I'm not coming to downplay it, downplay it at all. But people can be butchered in many, many different ways. Doesn't have to be from parents. I know a story of somebody that got embarrassed in public, by the head of his yeshiva. That was it. 15-year-old kid. This is the Teflon generation. Flatten him like a pancake for whatever. In public, embarrassed him. Finished. How do you bring someone back from that? It's very hard, right? Even being built up and you try and build someone up. Once the damage is done, it's hard enough, being an Orthodox Jew today, but, when a person gets hammered or there are social issues or, any number of things that could put a person down, they get hammered. And unless you get them help, straight away or some way to work it through, that's it. They could have a major blow. We may not think it's so major, but it could be something major where they say, that's it, I'm out. Right now, they could say, well, maybe, the head of the yeshiva had a bad day. Maybe, this one had a bad day, did something he shouldn't have done. Whatever the case is. I give one example. I guess I'll take your question. That a friend of my father's of blessed memory would say, when I was young, and the Rabbi hit me in school, and that's what Judaism is. And I said, but it's not. And he kept saying the same thing over and over again to give him an excuse why I never had to keep anything in Torah mitzvahs. So I said, why don't you just say, well, maybe the Rebbe had a bad day. Well, he can't say that, because if he said that, then he has to regroup and say, well, why is he not keeping Torah mitzvahs? So I heard Rabbi Wine should be well once say, imagine kids in 4th grade, has a bad teacher say, that's it, I'm out, I'm getting a job. Never happened, right? Most cases never going to happen. Why? They'll chalk it up to, to a bad experience. Hopefully they'll get the kid, they'll get the kid help. He'll get over the hump, and that's it. So why does somebody get to use that as an excuse? Because we're living in a Teflon generation. We're living in a world where I can give excuses not to do anything. And I'm not saying necessarily the excuses aren't valid, right? But we're gonna see if I get there about the idea of what I do. What I do and how that affects the person. Yeah, you had a question.
Well, there is a question from one in the audience, but I also wanted to make a statement about a time where I was publicly shamed, and how it made me feel and how, horrible it was. But then, when I met you, all I can say is I told you about it one time and you said, great. Personally, I have been publicly excommunicated out of Christianity.
Right.
And, it's happened 3 times. A couple of it were just sweep the dirt under the carpet. They were in the wrong, absolutely wrong. Right. The point of the matter was it was a public shaming. And when I told you, I said, yeah, I've been publicly excommunicated 3 times. And you said, good for you. You were really encouraging. And the way I looked at it is that it's not that big of a deal, right? And the reality is I'm actually glad it happened.
If it's everything you believe in and you just got flattened like a pancake, it's one thing. But if the whole thing's a lie anyway, so who cares what they say? And the way around this problem, I guess you had another question with somebody? Someone asked a different question?
Somebody out there, Janet, is asking if you could define Pikuach Nefesh. I'm probably not saying it right.
Something that you have to give up, something that is life-threatening, right? And basically anything that...
If you can define it.
I don't know how I'm going to define it, but it's really something that is life threatening. In other words, let's say a woman has to give birth, right? Her waters break. Your waters break, you go straight to the hospital. What if it's on Shabbos, right? What if it's on Shabbos? You don't wait, right? Even if Shabbos is going to go out in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or whatever, you could break Shabbos because her life is threatened. Right? If a person, if there's a fire, if there's a fire, let's say, I can do whatever I can I can try and put it out in different ways. It's not direct, right? In other words, you're not allowed to put out a fire on Shabbos. But if I can't put it out in an indirect way, right? That's certainly the best thing. If it's like life-threatening, technically I could put it out myself. Why? Because it has to be life-threatening, right? Something that's life-threatening, I have a right to defend myself, and I can basically break, any law in Shabbos if it's something that is going to be, life-threatening. Now, obviously, we try and minimize desecration of Shabbos as much as possible. If it's something, there's no other way. Let's say, I had an opportunity to put out, a small fire and say, no, you know what? Better a non-Jew do it. Let me go find a non-Jew. By the time you find a non-Jew, your house is burnt down, right? I don't have to go necessarily to that extent. If I have time and whatever, and, I could do it in a way where I don't have to desecrate or get a non-Jew to do it, it's certainly better. Right? But, if not, I can basically do anything, desecrate Shabbos to save a life. Right? Or to potentially save a life. Right? Because the Talmud tells a story. Let's say someone's underneath a huge pile of stones. Right? And you don't know if they're alive or not. Right? Now, I'm allowed to desecrate Shabbos to see if they're alive. Once you see they're dead, okay, then I have to stop. Right? But if there's a chance that they're alive, I can do that. There was a story my Rabbi told that happened probably more than 70 years ago, in England, that a child went missing. The child went missing in London. And, people got in their cars, they drove around, they desecrated Shabbos because that was considered a danger, right? A danger to the person's life. So obviously you have to know what is, what isn't, et cetera. But in general, anything that is life-threatening, technically speaking, I could break Shabbos and do whatever I want to stop it. Now, obviously, there are better ways to do it. That's just a general example, right? It's obvious that, I shouldn't say it's obvious, but, if a person can do it in a way where they are not going, they can, let's say a person had to call an ambulance, right? A person's wife's about to give birth, right? Water's broke, you call an ambulance. So I don't call in the normal way. Right, I'll lift up the phone instead of my right hand. I'll do it with my left hand. Right, if I'm right-handed. Right, and I'll push the buttons, or I'll do speed dial, so I don't have to push as many buttons or whatever. So I desecrate it in a way where it's only rabbinical, not on a Torah level. If I can do that, if I can't do that, I can desecrate it on a Torah level because you do whatever it can. You do whatever it takes to save a life. So,
well, that makes sense.
In other words, someone is drowning, let's say, and a person could save them, right? So there'd be an obligation, right? You're saving a life. Again, obviously you want to do it in a way where you're not desecrating a Torah prohibition. If you can get around that, better, right? If not, again, certainly when it comes to your own life, there's nothing to talk about, right? Definitely nothing to talk about, but the question is, what is considered pikuach nefesh? What is, how far does that go? Right? There's an example that comes up that when it comes to Shmona Esrei, saying the silent meditation, the Amidah, the most prolific prayer in Judaism, where we ask for all our needs, our spiritual needs, our physical needs. You're standing in front of God, petitioning Him for your needs. It's a high point of every service. So there's a question my Rabbi brought out during this whole Corona thing, where you're wearing a mask. Am I allowed to take off the mask during this prayer? Because it's the most important prayer that we say during the day, right? Whether in the morning, whether in the afternoon, whether at night. So the whole question, why? Because you wouldn't stand in front of a king with a mask. Right? It's not considered honorable to do such a thing. Right? So the question is, if I pull down my mask and everyone else is wearing masks, so what happens? I could give them something because I'm breathing throughout the mask, without a mask. So Rabbi says, well, is that considered pikuach nefesh? Right? Is that considered, if I do that, I'm putting people's lives in danger or not? right? So my Rebbe's point was that what what the Ministry of Health calls a danger and what Judaism calls a danger is not necessarily the same thing. And therefore, you need big guns, and meaning big rabbinical authorities to give us definition. Give one other example. I'll get back to this in a second. Right. The other example is if somebody doesn't wear a mask. Right. You could get fined. Certainly here in Israel, you can still get fined if you don't wear a mask. If someone's not wearing a mask or people aren't wearing masks or social distancing, can I rat on them? Can I call the police? Now, calling the police, if I'm not allowed to, right, that's the status of a moser, meaning you're turning over someone to the authorities, whether Jewish authority, non-Jewish authority, doesn't really matter. Punishment is I lose my portion of the world to come. That is the punishment. So you'll say, well, it's pikuach nefesh. They're endangering people's lives. So Rabbi said, you have to know, right? This gets back to the mask. You have to know if it's endangering people's lives or not. You have to ask top rabbinical authorities whether that is the case. You're going to say, what do they know about, what do they know about health? They know a lot of things you don't know about, right? They know things and have given information from above for a lot of things we have no idea. So we have big guns who to go to. But my Rabbi said once, he said twice, he said a lot of times that you're not allowed to turn someone in. You have to go to a higher authority, a much higher authority. Ask them, is this a case of pikuach nefesh or not? You yourself can't judge. You can't go by what the Ministry of Health says. Right? We're not saying what they're saying isn't necessarily true, but what are they calling pikuach nefesh? Because what we'll deem pikuach nefesh is something if it's 1 in 1,000. Right? Let's say 1 in 1,000 die from this pandemic. That's usually the rule of thumb. That's 0.001. Right? For many places, when the statistics I think are a little bit misread over here, where they're claiming how many people dying from COVID. Because what people are claiming, I don't know if it's true 100% or not, but if it is, what they're claiming is anyone who has it and they died, they're claiming they died from that. But they could have died from other things, not necessarily from that. So it could be the statistics.
Failure of an organ, yeah.
It could be they're totally inflated, right? I'm not even going to go into conspiracy and get into that, right? But if you look at a number of countries, right, the death rate is very, very small. It's smaller than 1 in 1,000. Much smaller than 1 in 1,000. That's not pikuach nefesh. But even if it's not pikuach nefesh, right, nonetheless, we still have to guard ourselves against this thing, right? So therefore, in the case of putting your mask on during the Shmona Esrei, silent meditation, whatever you want to call it, if they say, okay, this is 100% pikuach nefesh, then you have to wear it. But if that's not the case, which in many cases it's not, then you should take it off, right? You should definitely take it off because it's not considered honorable going in front of the king. But my Rebbe went one step further. He said, if you're still worried about it, go pray at least 2 feet or 2 meters away or more from anyone else, right? Just go somewhere where nobody else is and go pray there, right, with everybody else, and that'll take care of the problem. Yeah, question.
Yeah, Rabbi, somebody in the audience had brought up, and I know that you're a World War II expert about right around this topic of pikuach nefesh. Yeah. During the Holocaust, somebody had made a comment that rabbis had actually told, people in camps that it was okay to eat pork in this situation because every life was precious.
Right.
I know you're an expert when it comes to World War II. Perhaps you can clarify. This isn't that 1 in 1,000 event at that moment, right?
But in this case, it's saving your own life. Now, if it were to be idolatry, if they say, listen, eat this thing, it's going to save you the holy wafer, right? That you're not allowed to do. That you have to die. Why? Because that's idolatry. When it comes to, let's say, pork or something forbidden, I'm allowed to derive benefit from it, right? This is the only way you're going to save your life. Now, there were people in the camps, right, that refused to eat it. they sustain themselves in vegetables or whatever. They didn't want to do it.
There's honor in that. Yeah.
They didn't feel it was right to do, and they didn't do it, right? But
Costing their lives. Yeah.
But if it's about saving your life or saving the life of others, and that's the only thing you have, otherwise you're for sure going to die. Who says you have to die? Right? I mean, these are horrible questions to have to. I know, and
I probably got you away from.
To have to answer. I'm not saying for me. I'm saying for the rabbis. The rabbis of that time. There's a great book. It's called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. Anyone wants to, you can just Google it. It's a great book. That's whatever. And in dire straits where people were asked and how people, live their lives. There were people that did whatever they could not to break the Sabbath. They did things in different ways in order not to do that. They did different things. They risked their lives, to bake matzah. They didn't have an obligation to. They could have been killed on the spot, for doing such a thing. There were people willing to do that, right? Certainly willing to do that. So certainly eating, if a person, let's say, for example, a person had an ulcer, right? If you get an ulcer attack, you eat whatever you can, right? That can be pikuach nefesh. That could be a danger. So a person, if they're out somewhere, it's nowhere kosher, it's going to take them a while to get there, or to get any kosher food, you can eat non-kosher right on the spot, right? Otherwise, you'll die, right? Otherwise, potentially, you'll die. So if that's the case, it's not a problem, right? That's not going to be a problem. But these are special circumstances, right? We're not saying across the board that I should be allowed to do this. Depends on the circumstance. In the times of the Holocaust, yeah, people were faced with that choice. People that were able to survive or somewhat survive. The choice is, we just went through a 24-hour fast, and it was like, 36 degrees Celsius. It was pretty, it was definitely pretty. It was pretty hot. I mean, most people weren't outside, right? But imagine, you read some stories of the Holocaust, what people went through. They didn't have any food. They were starving, right? They're absolutely starving. Barely had any water, any food. They starved to death. And the ones that survived, totally malnutrition, nothing to talk about. And anyone who survived, who ate anything non-kosher, you can't blame them, right? 100%, you can't blame them. Save their lives, right? 100% save their lives. On the other hand, the other people didn't want to do it, right? Or absolutely didn't want to do it. They didn't want to put that garbage in the body. So, that there is what to be said, certainly for that. But, but again, if it's about your life or someone else's life, right? In other words, for you to survive, there's a curse in the Torah we read in the, in the special liturgical poems that we read on the keynotes that we read on Tisha B'Av. People were starving. People during the destruction of the temple were starving, and mothers ate their kids. I mean, it's a horrific thing. Wow. Right, but that's one of the curses in the Torah. You don't listen to me, this is what's going to happen, and all these curses have been fulfilled. And okay, you're hungry, you're thirsty, you got a headache, you're reading all these liturgical poems in the morning, whatever. I mean, I was in a great air conditioned place, but still, it's uncomfortable. You're sitting on the floor, all these things. You get to something like that, and you read that. How can you not give a kvetch? How can you not almost shed a tear? I mean, we read the destruction of the great 10 martyrs, faces ripped off, heads chopped off. I mean, it's like, imagine someone who's alive. I don't want to get too gross here, but imagine someone who's alive and what they, and these barbarians, that's what they are. These barbarians are taking whatever they're taking in order to carve the flesh off your face. So one of the great rabbis that died, when they got to the place where he put tefillin, right here, right in the center of the forehead, right, where babies has a soft spot, like right there. So it says over there that he screamed out and the whole world shook. That's how great the person was, but the whole world shook. Can you imagine having a person's face ripped off their face? Having the skin ripped off their face. I mean, Rabbi Akiva also had his flesh combed with iron combs, and just cut him up to pieces. It's we can't imagine what the what the
horrors out there, Rabbi.
You can't imagine what these what these people went through. But great rabbi, they said, you want a blessing from me? Hey, you see this person over there? He's got a number on his arm. Go ask him for a blessing because his belief in God is still intact. We can't judge them, what they went through. They saw people die in front of them. The story of a great rabbi, head of a yeshiva, and I saw one of the boys just sitting outside, relaxing, whatever. And he said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Whatever. I'm just taking it easy. I'm a little bit stressed, whatever. I'm just taking it a little bit easy." So the head of the yeshiva looked at him. He said, "I want to tell you a story." He said, I was running for my life during the war, whatever. He said, I saw my own son killed in front of me. He said, killed in front of me. He said, I don't think, whatever you're going through, I'm not saying whatever it is, it's nothing. I don't think it's anything compared to that. I don't think the stress is anything compared to that. And he's like, go back inside and learn. That was it. that was it. Okay, different people with different levels. But the point that we made before is that if a person gets beaten down in life, which a lot of us do, and people say things and whatever, you won't be this, and you won't, no one's going to accept you, and blah blah blah, and all the, and the parents don't come along, it's something you have to deal with, right? 100%, it's something you have to deal with, and a person may never ever get the pat on the back from their parents because they changed their lives. They'll make fun of it. They'll say all kinds of things. True. Obviously, you have to show respect. But I told this person, you'll never, ever probably get any respect from them at all. Move on.
Move on.
It's painful.
Big advice, Rabbi. Advice.
It's painful, right?
Yes.
And another piece of advice, I said, listen, these people don't know anything. They can barely read Aleph Beis. They never learned. So these people are crazy. So anytime someone says anything, sticks and stones, look at them like they're in a straitjacket. Because if you don't do that and you say, how can I do that? I have to give them a rebuke, and I have to this, they're not going to listen. Right? If they're not going to listen, they're going to hate God more, they're going to hate Torah more. Why am I going to ram it down their throats? There's no obligation. Right? No obligation to hit them over the head if they're not going to listen. So that being the case, someone will say, oh, you're too sensitive. Yeah, why is it really burning you? Because you believe it's the truth. You believe God's getting spit on and all this. You feel like you have to defend him. I'm not saying not, right? But at the end of the day, nothing's going to come out of it. And I understand why people would be, oversensitive. They got this new thing, they're really into it. They believe it's absolute truth, and all that. And in the end, they don't want to see someone just make fun of it. They don't want to see someone trample on it, but there's nothing you can do about it because they're not going to listen, right? In most cases, they're not going to listen, and if they don't listen, okay.
Yeah. Rabbi, we see that with trolls today. That's all they do. They don't care. They just keep going.
All right, but again, if you don't know who the person is, you might say, okay, it's a little bit hurtful, what they say and whatever. Okay, right? But if it's family, it's siblings, it's parents, it's a lot harder to take. It's a lot harder to take because it hits home more. That's the problem. You want to call it oversensitivity, whatever it is, but they just say, oh, I remember you used to do this. I remember you used to do that. It's hard. You'll never get out of that stereotype unless the person wants to drink, right? That's, and that's it. So comes along the Rambam here. And, actually, before I get to the Rambam, we said that, speaking too much can cause pain. Right, so we mentioned, that's how we get on to this about depression, right, or something, some of these other illnesses. So again, even if a person got put down and kept getting put down, right, plenty of people out there, parents just abuse them psychologically, and a person has to build themselves up, and get in the right frame of mind. It might take years of therapy. But believing what they say is exactly what they want, right? And obviously, you're better than that. These people are messed up, and these people say, oh, just do what you want, and, we don't care, and, you can just drop dead and whatever. There are people that say that. And, a person can say, well, if that's what they said, well, here's what they said. They're deranged, right? Somebody who's deranged, why should I listen to them? Because it's painful. And if a person believes that long enough, you just get into a bad cycle. And once you continue to get into a bad cycle, it's very, very hard to pull yourself out, right? A person may need to be on medication, no question. right? For a very long time in order to get out of that bad cycle. So it comes on the Rambam, and the Rambam says with forbidden speech comes tremendous punishment. That the example is even a person saying songs. Let's say you sang a song, a nice song, nice tune, nice catchy tune, and it's got forbidden speech in it. So you're saying, I'm just singing a song. I'm not speaking badly against someone else. Also forbidden. Right? People go to weddings. Sometimes, someone wants to sing a song in a different language or whatever it is. Maybe it's about praising God or it's not praising God or whatever the thing is. If it's something negative, right, it's still a disgusting thing to do. Doesn't matter whether you sing it.
Yeah.
Because you're giving into this whole thing. Speaking badly against others, if a person is a habitual speaker of Lashon Hara, what's the punishment? Loses his portion of the world to come. That's the punishment. Now, the Chofetz Chaim in his work, Shmiras HaLashon, about speaking Lashon Hara, did not put that in there. He didn't put that in, that a habitual speaker loses a portion of the world to come. So one of his main students, Ramosha Schneider, blessed memory, my Rebbe's Rebbe, asked him, said, Rebbe, isn't it true a person loses their portion of the world to come if you're a habitual speaker of Lashon Hara? So the Chofetz Chaim said yes. So he said, how come you didn't put it in? He said, I didn't put it in. He said, because if I put it in and just about everybody transgresses this prohibition, people will give up before they start. If you already tell them you're not going to have a portion of the world to come, everybody transgresses, they're never going to do anything. They won't put on tefillin, they won't pray, they won't do mitzvahs, right? So that big a punch, that big a smack to people, I didn't want to give, even though for sure, that's true. But the novelty over here is the fact that if a person's, let's say they sing a song, right? And in the song is forbidden speech, right? Why am I allowed to say it? You say, but I'm not saying it, I'm just singing the song. Yeah, so listen to some of the lyrics, which I don't recommend. Listen to some of the lyrics in songs, right? A lot of them are 100% forbidden to listen to, right? Because they're disgusting. There are innuendos, obviously sexual innuendos, other things that are 100% for a person not only speak about, but to listen to, right? So therefore, even if I'm not the one saying it, right, I'm not the one speaking badly against someone else, they're gonna say so. Who cares? It's only a song, right? But in the end, you're speaking badly against someone else, even by singing the song. Right? And the punishment is tremendous. Right? The punishment is severe, as we mentioned, that a person could lose his portion in the world to come. Right? Now let's hit one other aspect. I don't think we're going to get through the whole thing. We'll see. That practice is the main thing. Yeah, what does it mean? What does it mean practice is the main thing? And one who talks excessively brings on sin. Now, being quiet, we mentioned something to certainly be praised for. Right? But there's nothing greater than action. Now, so before I get to that, it means that even though you have to know the hows and the whys of why we do things, and sometimes it's going to be because God said so, right? And that's it. The most important thing is not to stand on the sidelines, but be proactive. Now, what's the excuse people make? The excuse people make is very simple. What do people say? People will say, come on, if I don't fully understand it, and it's really God's law, quote unquote, this is like a contradiction in terms.
Get it wrong.
Yeah, how in the world can I keep what he says if I don't fully get it? Right? If I don't really fully understand, right? So when I did the previous shows on Tanakh Talk about belief in God, right? The first thing we spoke about was an atheist, right, who doesn't believe in anything. There is no God, right? There's a believer on the other side, and there's an agnostic, right? Someone who's an agnostic will say, I have doubts. I have doubts about God's existence. So I know, some people that will admit that they are agnostic, but if I would pin them down and say, okay, that's a viable thing, have you, in the last 25 years, have you ever spent any time researching and trying to get the information to the truth? And what's the answer going to be? A goose egg. Never. They read a Wikipedia article on it. Did they see a movie about Torah and science? Did they ever look into it? No, but it's an excuse. It's an excuse to say, well, I'm not a believer, but I have doubts. Okay, what are the doubts? Let's have a discussion. What exactly are your doubts? They're not going to get into the discussion. You know why? Because this person is intermarried. The Jew married to a non-Jew. So what if I convince them? What if I convince them that the Torah is true? If I convince them the Torah is true, they got a problem. What's the problem? You're living with a non-Jew. You got non-Jewish kids. Right? It goes against your world outlook because you're not going to change. And what are you going to do with your wife and kids? Right? What's going to happen? Are you willing to lose everything, to take a chance and lose everything? So I had one person tell me, if I look into it and I find out it's true, this is more than 30 years ago, if I find out it's true and I have to change, I'm not willing to do it. Okay? So that person is much more intellectually honest. But if a person makes a statement, and this is the crucial point. If a person makes a statement and they say, I was given sweaters a number of years ago by a relative for my kids, and it said 100% wool. Torah tells me I can't wear wool and linen together. Why not? It's a chok. It's a law we don't understand. So I told the person, I said, great, thank you very much. I just have to get them checked. It's probably not an issue. And they said, why? What's the problem? Right? So this Jew obviously never heard of this law. So I said, it's a problem. You're not allowed to wear wool and linen together. It's like, wow, so interesting. Never heard such a thing. Why? I said, I don't know. It's a law we don't understand. But, there are people here who know how to check. They know the laws, whatever. And, I'll take it to check, them to check it. And it's probably shouldn't be an issue. I mean, it's an issue, obviously. You can't wear it. So they're like, but what's the reason? I said, I don't know. I said, I don't even have a good explanation. I said, we don't really know. So I said, but if you can't give me an explanation, then why should I keep it? So I flipped the script here, and I said, what if I have 10 explanations? What if I have 20 explanations? Is that gonna make you keep it or not? So you could come up with any excuse. Nah, I don't like this one. Nah, I don't like that one. Nah, I don't like the other one. Say no. I haven't delved into it enough. To be able to keep it. No, it's called laziness. Either the Torah is true, or it's not true. If it's not true, prove it to me. You're an agnostic. You have doubts. What are the doubts? Right? What are the main doubts gonna be? Tzaddik v'ralo. When a righteous person, evil befalls him. Right? Righteous people have difficult times. Why do evil people have it easy? Age-old question. Right? Read the book of Job. Now I don't want to read the book of Job. Okay? Right? It's an age-old question. I said I have a way to try and understand it. You're interested? Nobody home. They talk a good game. It's about philosophy. How can I ever do something I don't fully understand? This is God writing the book. Right? He passed it down to Moshe. Moshe passed it down to us. We're not going to fathom everything. 90% doesn't make sense logically. And even the things that make sense logically are extremely complicated. Right? So people use that as an excuse. They use it as an excuse, and we say over here, you got to be proactive. It's about action. Doesn't mean I just sit there like a dolt, like an idiot, and I don't try and figure out things. I don't try to understand it. Obviously, there are multiple levels. It's Kabbalistic level. There are other levels. Whatever it's going to be. We're not going to get there, most of us. You know what? And God's going to say, I don't care if you get there. I want you to keep what you need to keep. And if you don't keep what you need to keep, you're going to get punished. Right? The Torah says clear. He's not talking. You can say, well, maybe the Torah's only talking to righteous people. Maybe, but he's not. He's talking to everybody. Everybody has this obligation. If everybody has this obligation, right, then you have to keep what he says, whether you understand it fully, whether you don't. Comes along Rabbeinu Yonah, and again, this is an excuse. People will throw out that that's what it is. It's an excuse. It has no weight, it has no relevance, but people will throw it out there only to say, well, I'm still not sure. Okay. What have you done to try and make yourself sure? Nothing. So you're lying. Basically, you're lying. Because the bottom line is, if you look into it, you find out it's true, you have to change. And if you're into marriage, you don't want to change. Okay, I understand. You're going to push it off. Just admit I'd be much happier. People would admit, okay, I'm not going to look into it, but I still have doubts. Okay, at least you know who you're dealing with, and that's going to be most people, because most people are not going to look into it. They're just. How many people have said they're agnostic, right? You know, they were thinking one day, do I believe in God? Well, maybe. Am I an atheist? No, I'm not an atheist. Am I a believer? No, I'm not a believer. I'm an agnostic. 2 minutes they thought about it, they move on. They haven't thought about it anymore. It's not an issue. Not an issue by them. That's why you have to act. Doesn't matter what you understand or don't. Doesn't mean we don't have to try. We have an obligation to try and do whatever we can to fulfill God's will and understand what we need to do. So comes along Rabbeinu Yonah, famous Rabbeinu Yonah of Gerondi, who wrote a famous book, Shari Tshuva, Gates of Repentance, right? He has a commentary here on Pirkei Avos, and he says it means don't teach the importance of mitzvahs or how to do the mitzvahs when you yourself do not do them. As the rabbis of blessed memory tell us, sweet are the words that come from someone that keeps them. So in other words, he's saying, oh, you know, you're going to talk about
that makes great sense.
How important it is to keep Torah mitzvahs. You don't keep Torah mitzvahs, right? So why should I listen to you, right? Famous story I told about my Rabbi. He was on a boat. He was on a boat, and there was a doctor there, you know, speaking about the bad effects of smoking, and all the terrible effects and whatever. And then, you know, gives his whole lecture. After the lecture, he lights up a cigarette, right? Lights up a cigarette. So Rabbi asked him, you're a walking contradiction. How can you speak about the badness of, you know, smoking, and you yourself smoke? He said, listen, I know it's going to take years off of my life, something I can't give up. It's just too strong a desire, i.e. he's addicted by nicotine, right? It's too big a desire. Why should I give it up? So someone like that, you know, is going to say, you know, do as I say, not as I do. Can't listen to him, right? Obviously, if someone's going to teach you it's going to tell you really, it's really important to keep kosher, right? As a Jew, you should really keep kosher. And you catch them in a Chinese restaurant eating pork strips. Like how important, how important is it? You're getting the wrong message, right? So somebody like that, if they don't listen to the rabbis, why are you going to listen to them, right? In other words, they're not doing the mitzvahs that they should. If they're not doing the mitzvahs that they should, they have no believability. Why in the world should I listen to them? So Talmud tells me, Baba Kama chapter page 17a, anyone wants to look it up, tells us learning Torah is so great because by learning we come to keep and observe it. Right? In other words, learning comes and I'm going to keep it. Right? In other words, whatever I learn, I'm going to do. So Rashi there says the importance of learning is going to bring us to action, to exemplify what I learned. Others learn just the opposite. Everything's dependent on the learning. In other words, it's all about learning and not necessarily what I derive from it or whatever. But the reality is, if a person learns, and the Talmud is the base of everything we keep, whether you want to listen to the rabbis, you don't want to listen to the rabbis, it's not the point of this argument. Checkmate, right? It's not part of this argument. The idea is that what we learn should bring us to action. Mm-hmm. If it doesn't bring us to action, we've spoken about this before, because I'm not going to beat a dead horse, because I'm almost at the end of time here, right? And that is that if I learn something and it doesn't affect me in any way, then as Rav Moshe Snyder, blessed memory, would say, I'm an ultra orthodox student. I'm learning Torah like mathematics. It doesn't apply. Now, I asked my Rabbi on this. Someone who learns Torah like that, even if you say, the Talmud says, the person who learns it not for the sake of heaven, he could come to learn it for the sake of heaven. So even if he's not learning it for the right reason, maybe the Torah is so powerful, it'll put him in the right direction. He says, but if at the outset they're learning, they're not interested in doing, he said that doesn't apply. In other words, so I asked them, I said, okay, someone who learns like that, like an ultra-Orthodox student, it's like another subject, it's like mathematics. Do they get the mitzvah of learning Torah or not? So I was learning with him at the time all of the commandments according to the Rambam and the order of the commandments, and that's how I developed my connection to him. We started learning once a week for like an hour, and I had my tape recorder, all of a blessed memory going, right? My tape recorder's going, and he didn't want to answer the question. I said, somebody who learns at this level, they learn at this level, like an ultra-Orthodox student, what do they get? I said, do they get the mitzvah of learning Torah? Because mitzvah of learning Torah is greater than anything else. And he didn't want to answer. So, I'll tell you a fundamental principle. If Rabbi doesn't want to answer, doesn't matter what you do. You won't convince him. He's like an immovable object. Forget it. No matter what you say, he's not going to move. So, I asked the question again. And he's like, he didn't want to answer. Meanwhile, my tape recorder's going. So I said, all right, I want to get an answer. So how am I going to get an answer? I bang the table. Dust goes flying. Papers go flying. Books get moved.
I don't mean to stop you, but that's the third time you've banged the table, and now we've lost you. We can only see you from the nose down. You've been slowly climbing higher and higher because your camera's pointing lower and lower.
Sorry.
And that last one was a good solid thump. Now we got you perfect, Rabbi.
Okay,
Sorry. Go ahead,
all
sir.
Right, no problem. So anyway, I banged on the table. The son comes running in. Papers go flying. And Rabbi looks at his son and is like, no, don't worry, it's okay. Then he looks at me with these big eyes glaring at me. And he goes, no. I said, you going to answer me? I said, you going to answer me or not? So finally he goes, okay, they get something, but it's not called learning Torah. I said, that's all you had to say. I wouldn't have had to bang on the table. No dust or whatever. But the whole point of learning is not mental gymnastics.
Right.
Learning is about doing. So
it's not putting it in a bag.
So when you're learning Talmud, right, whoever's learning Talmud out there, it's about what do we derive from it? What are the laws? What do we do? It's the base of all what we do. So you can't do, I'm just going to learn it for intellectual stimulation.
Right.
Because if you learn it for intellectual stimulation, that's all it is, right? Torah is there to change you. It's about action. It's about doing things. There's a lot of Jewish philosophy out there. Don't get me wrong. Plenty of Jewish philosophy, right? But it's all about what I do. And if I don't act on what I learn, then all I'm doing is learning it like another subject. And if I learn it like another subject, and this actually gets in the beginning of what we said against the chief rabbi of England, and that is, a person goes to university, a person goes to college, their mind gets messed up, right? Because they're more intellectual, so they say,
high and deeper.
Right, exactly. PhD, pilot higher and deeper, exactly. So what you have is somebody who's got other influences that are bad, right? That gets in the way of Torah. And then you equate the Avos, Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, and all these other great prophets, then you equate them to everyday people. When you equate them to everyday people, what you've done, first of all, you've done a tremendous disservice to them. But what you've done is you've put your bogus academia way of looking at things into the Torah, which is forbidden to do, right? That's why, you get all these feminists and how the Torah is against feminism and whatever. When did feminism start? 150 years ago? A couple hundred years ago? At best, you say, the whole world was against women and women, didn't have equal rights. Susan B. Anthony, didn't have right to vote, and all these things, second-class citizens. And there's an obvious question. You know what the obvious question is? What does that have to do with Torah? You say, the Torah's misogynist. It's all about the men. Do you understand why? Are men and women created differently or the same? Right? Great rabbi gets up to speak to a bunch of feminists, and he goes, is there any difference between men and women? And they go, no. He goes, okay, let me ask the question again. Is there any difference? Anything you can think of between men and women? He goes, I got a difference. Women can conceive and have children. Men can't do that. There's a difference. So he started off by saying, if there's a biological difference, biology 101, 101A, then there could be spiritual differences as well. But the point is, I guess this is what I'll end with, the point is you cannot put your 21st century puny mind into the mind of the Torah. Just the opposite. You got to put the Torah inside of you, right? And today that's a very hard thing because we're not politically correct, right? We're anti-gay. We should be, right? It is 100% forbidden. We're anti-pig. It's forbidden, right? A Jew's not allowed to eat it. A non-Jew can eat as much as they want. It doesn't affect them. same way as the Jews. So you might say we have an image problem, but you cannot take things out of context and say, oh, this means this and this is like this, and that you have to see it in the full context, right? And when you take it out of context, you do a tremendous disservice. So, we're the first group, so to speak, first quote unquote religion gave them rights, right? We have a marriage document. It's called the ketubah. If we get divorced, God forbid, right? If someone gets divorced, then they have to give alimony, right? Whatever the ketubah is worth, they have to sustain, the wife, right? They have to, clothe her, feed her, give her conjugal relations, right? Other things that's right there in the document. That didn't happen. That was the first time it happened anywhere in history, right? Wow. It wasn't anywhere else that we gave women's rights. Oh, the women this, the women that. So the whole lot, to speak about that. But again, if we're looking at things from a 20th century mind, without delving into what the Torah says and why it says it. Forget what you know now. Once you understand what the Torah says, then we can have a discussion. But if you don't understand what the Torah says, you can't read Hebrew. You've never learned. Do not offer an opinion. We're not interested in opinions from people who don't know anything, right? Learn from the right people, get the right information, and get on the right track. Don't spew anything you think because you read it on Wikipedia. Checkmate.
Oh, Rabbi Coffman, it's always a joy.
I see we didn't finish. There's still a little bit to speak about this, this mission to finish up, but whatever. We'll finish it up, I guess, next week.
Well, Rabbi, I've been trying to do some studying on the side of things I'm permitted to study and look into and just try to get to, know more. And really, from what I've ever taken from Rambam is know in order to perform. It's not about just stocking it away in a stockpile hard drive in your mind or something. It's about application, and I really appreciate what you brought everything out. But that 21st century mindset in applying it upon, I get where you're coming from. This week I was reading up stuff that had to do with literal meanings, and studying. Basically, Peshat and Darash and just the way things interplay and the way the Amorim we're looking at things, and I say to myself, I think there's enough super soundness in Torah, and the way the rabbis have carried this forward to protect what it is. And I think there's room for, I think it was the Rashbam, Rashi's grandson, was really someone who was able to put, a modern day, not spin, but a modern day. I think he believed that or held that a modern day view of what was literal, of what was current, played a positive role, and certain things could be brought in. But I get where you're coming from with this 100%. Is that to look back at the great leaders like you've brought up today about King David and Solomon and others that if somebody's speaking out contrary, I mean I couldn't hold a candle, and who would I be, or who should anybody today be? I think the greatness of people like that in the past is well established, and the sheer fact that they're in Torah, whether it shows the story that's gone up and down, Hashem's put them there for a reason and for a purpose, and there's just greatness in there.
I guess the last thing is the fact that if you have knowledge, we can talk. If you don't have knowledge, sit back, learn, watch videos,
put it into practice.
Yeah, put it in practice, but learn from people you need to learn from, because coming to it from your own biases, you'll never get there. You'll never get there, and you have to be part of community, but you have to listen to well-established people who know what they're talking about. And you can't just have read one Wikipedia article and you say, oh, Stephen Hawking, gonna knock him off. It's over. I'm gonna knock off his PhD. No one's gonna do that. But within Judaism, everyone thinks they have an opinion, and their opinion is just as valid as the rabbi's opinion. And again, you can't hold a candle to them. I can't hold a candle to them. My Rabbi can't hold a candle to them, right? It's
Yeah.
the generations that keep going. We're on a much lower level, on a much lower
Yeah.
level. So,
Don't
I
forget we
guess
stand
one of
on the
my
shoulders of giants. Yes.
right. It's one of my pet peeves that people claim a lot of things they don't know. They just don't know. I understand where it's coming from, right? But people are not willing to be humble and say, I can say what I want. My opinion is just as valid. Okay.
Well, it's just like fingers and toes at that point, isn't
Right.
it? It's not
Right.
Torah anymore. I think you've really
Mhm.
clarified that. Now,
Yeah.
folks, you can always catch Rabbi at his website, orthodoxconversion.com. You'll find him on social media. You can find him on YouTube. You can find him on Facebook. He does his weekly talk show with Tanakh Talk and many other classes during the week, folks. I encourage you to reach out to him. Don't be afraid to support him. He's doing some wonderful work. I always enjoy the sheer fact that he takes the time out and teaches us the ethics of the fathers. It's a very, very important topic, and I am just overjoyed that B'nai Noach are tuning in, and we get a lot of other folks as well, Jewish folks also tune in. But I'm trying to see that the people, the nations of the world, get the ethics of the fathers, understand that there's a deep moral, applicable knowledge that's there that we just aren't getting from any other source unless it comes from the Jewish rabbis. And so, Rabbi, thank you so much. So, tentatively, are we on for next week, Rabbi? Are you good? Is
Sounds
your
like
schedule open?
sounds like a plan.
All right. So, folks, we're going to tune out for now, and I'll be back in probably about 20 minutes or so with my next class. But it's always a joy to spend time with Rabbi Coffman. So, Rabbi, till next week, bless you, Rabbi.
Hey, folks.